I returned home from work with an unpleasant feeling in my stomach. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling I would soon find out. It was only 5 o'clock on Friday evening. This is unusual for me as I work for myself and like to spend time alone in the office on a Friday night to make sure everything is in order and ready for the big day on Saturday. My name is Mark Ashworth and my business is Ashworth Autos. I started my working life at the age of 16 as a car mechanic. At 20, he opened his own auto repair shop, specializing in expensive European cars. There are a lot of them in our area, but the only mechanic is 150 miles away. Yes, it was expensive, but I had a friendly bank manager who understood my business plan, and I was a very talented mechanic. Plus, I had a deposit left to me by my grandfather. All European cars are driven exclusively by wealthy people. They come to me because I have a good reputation. Soon they began asking me to find cars, usually used ones, for their sons and daughters when they started driving. I quickly added a used car business to my auto repair shop and then an auto body repair shop. Now I am 38 years old. I have 4 locations in the area, and I own a business, according to the most conservative estimates, worth $8 million. I returned home early because my wife, Hannah, said that I needed to be home early today. She has an important proposal and she wants to talk to me about it. Hannah is 35 years old, and we have been married for 14. We met because her father, John, asked me to find her a car for her 20th birthday. A spark immediately jumped between us. That day, when she was picking up the car, she asked me out on a date. A year later, we got married and now have 2 boys, James, 12, and Martin, 10. Hannah's father, John, is an accountant, but a very nice man. He is a partner in an accounting office and helps me a lot in business, devoting a lot of time to me. Hannah's mom, Stephanie, calls me a fat monkey and makes it clear that she thinks her daughter could aspire to more than me. Hannah has an older brother, Alex, and a younger sister, Susan. Alex never got married, and it is clear that he has no intention of doing so. Susan is married to a lawyer named Barkley. He fancies himself a shark, but he actually makes his living as a trial lawyer. Hannah's mother considers him the best son-in-law in the world. Something happened to Susan in her early teens. I never found out what it was, but she had to have an operation that left her unable to have children. As a result, our 2 boys were our only grandchildren. Stephanie seems to be annoyed by this, but Susan has become depressed because her mother only talks about the children. Hannah is worried about her sister. At one family meeting, I suggested they adopt a child, but Stephanie exploded, saying that she wanted the grandchildren to be biologically hers. John's next proposal was surrogacy. Susan asked how this could be done, and I explained as best I could about IVF. Stephanie wrinkled her nose again, saying it was too complicated, and asked who would be the egg donor. Later that evening, Hannah and I discussed Susan's problem. I suggested that she donate her eggs for IVF. Hannah asked how this would happen, and I replied that I would look into the matter. It turned out that retrieving eggs was not that difficult, and I brought this information home. This way, Stephanie can have her biological children and all will be well in the world. This conversation took place about 3 months ago, and since then this topic has come up randomly, about every 2 to 3 weeks. The reason I have a sinking feeling in my stomach is because Hannah has been a little out of it for the last week or 10 days. I couldn't understand what was going on, but she was corresponding with someone. She's usually completely open with her phone, but in this case she was secretive. Besides, we haven't had sex for over a week. She gave me pleasure below the belt, but there was no sex. This is very unusual for Hannah. Our house stands on a plot of just over 1.5 hectares. I inherited the land from my grandfather when I was 11 years old. I built a house on it soon after we got married. My plot is part of a 6-hectare property that my grandfather ran as a gardening business. He left the house and almost half a hectare to my older brother. The remaining 4 hectares were sold for housing development, and the proceeds were transferred to a trust fund for the benefit of the whole family, including the education of our children. The house is not visible from the road, so when I turned towards it, I saw only a few parked cars. and I realized that my bad feelings were justified when I saw John and Stephanie's car, Susan and Barclay's car, and several other people whom I knew to be more distant relatives. I felt like a whole storm was approaching me, and they were going to pretend that it was a light breeze. I parked at the house and went inside, bracing myself for the coming storm. I deliberately entered through the garage door, knowing that they would not hear me. I stood in the utility room and listened, but only muffled voices reached me. I always carry a voice recorder in my pocket. John taught me this as I walked into a meeting to take notes at the end. Out of habit, I turned on the recorder and put it back in my pocket, confident that it would capture most of the conversation that I realized was about to take place. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and entered the kitchen. 8 people were sitting in a corner next to the kitchen. Hannah, John, and Stephanie sat on the 3-seater sofa. Susan and Barclay are on a double. Alex is on a single, and Joan and Karen, the 2 aunts, are on chairs brought from the dining room. The only thing left empty was the chair that had been moved from my home office. It was positioned so that it was surrounded by Alex and the 2 aunties and was directly across from Hannah, John, and Stephanie. Clearly a prepared ambush. As I closed the door behind me, Hannah said, "Come in, Mark, and sit down. We're just discussing a couple of things and would like to hear your opinion." I thought, we'd like to hear your opinion, so now they'll offer me something, and I'm expected to have no choice. I went to the corner but turned one of the stools from the bar counter and sat on it. I wanted the atmosphere in the room to change, and sitting on a high stool, I not only separated from everyone else but also became taller. That is, they would have to look up to me. I was silent, but looked Hannah straight in the eyes, and my face showed great irritation. She blushed when she realized what I was doing, but she couldn't hold my gaze. I slowly looked around the room. John and Alex didn't look at me. Stephanie had an expression of triumph on her face, as if she was about to achieve her cherished goal. Barclay looked into my eyes and grinned, as if he was going to get the better of me, and Susan's face appeared with a smile that had not been there for a long time. Hannah sat silently, waiting for me to speak, but I didn't do this. Looking around the room, I continued to look at her, and she tried her best to avoid my gaze. I thought, I can wait as long as you, and was silent. It turned into a battle, and she started to get angry with me. Finally, Stephanie broke the silence by saying, "We discussed Susan's problem, and it seems we found a solution." I didn't answer Stephanie and continued to look at Hannah, who was now fidgeting under my gaze. Finally, Hannah looked up at me. "Mark, as you know, Susan cannot have children, and you have explored the possibility of surrogacy, and we believe that this is a good option. Mom wants the eggs to biologically belong to the family, so over the past few weeks we have been discussing the option of me being the surrogate mother." I raised my hand to stop her. "Have you discussed this over the past few weeks? And why did they consider it necessary to exclude me from these discussions? Obviously, this decision will have a major impact on the boys and I think we should have been aware of all of this." Stephanie chimed in, "What do you mean? This has nothing to do with you. Just hold her hand and smile." I took a deep breath and turned to Stephanie, keeping my eyes on Hannah. "Naturally, this will affect me and the boys. Their mother will be in an IVF clinic and then carry the baby, which means she won't be able to do certain things for them, like carry them into their crib. Both of her previous pregnancies were difficult, and both times she was hospitalized for a month with high blood pressure. She will have to undergo tests and spend time in the hospital during the birth, which will remove her from their lives. She will also need time to recover. It would take a certain degree of selfishness not to realize how devastating this would be for my family. What worried me the most was when, as I said, IVF clinic, Hannah's gaze slid around the room. Barclay's face grinned, and Susan flinched. What am I missing? Stephanie obviously enjoyed bringing me up to speed. There will be no IVF clinic. My grandson will be conceived in love and passion, not in a test tube. The light bulb went on. This is an ambush, and the others are here to keep me under control. I felt anger flare on my face and shouted, "Hannah, explain everything now." She glanced at me and I saw fear in her eyes. The conversation had not gone as she had planned, and now the truth was out and she had lost control of the conversation. She said, "IVF is not the best option. 2 months ago, I stopped taking the pills. My period came 3 weeks ago and will come in another week. Doctors say that in about 2 to 3 weeks, I will become fertile. During my fertility period, Barkley will move in with me for a week, and by the end of the week, I should be pregnant. And then Susan and Barksley will be able to adopt a child who will be biologically related to both of them." By this time, I was standing right in front of Hannah and felt Alex's hand on my shoulder. I tried to pull away, but he held my shoulder very tightly. I heard him say, "Hang in there, Mark. Please don't do anything stupid." I stood up straight and, without addressing anyone, said, "Don't do anything stupid? Nothing will be stupid after this shit." Now I turned to everyone and said, "Get out of my house!" Stephanie tried to insist. "No, we must agree and decide whether you will stay in the house when this happens." John was already up and trying to get his wife out of her seat when I said, "John, I've never hit a woman before, but if your stupid wife isn't out of this house in 10 seconds, God knows I'll hit her." At that moment, Stephanie looked into my eyes and for the first time realized the truth of my words. She jumped up and asked, "Hannah, don't you need Alex to stay behind for protection?" I laughed. "If you think I would physically harm my wife, you don't know me. If you think that this nonsense will end well for our marriage, then you really don't know me at all." Hannah gasped and then said, "Mom, please go away. Everyone else leaves. Mark and I have a lot to discuss." When everyone left the house, I went into my office, locking the door. First of all, I downloaded the conversation that had just taken place, then rebooted the recorder. When he did this, Hannah screamed, "Mark, I have never seen you behave so rudely with anyone. You need to come out here and discuss everything like an adult." Good God, she's throwing all this crap at me and she's angry that I'm angry, I thought to myself. I laughed, but remained silent. At work, I have a system for recording all phone calls, SMS, and WhatsApp messages. They are recorded as part of our CRM system and have saved us on more than one occasion when we were billing for extra work. Hannah's phone was a business phone, so all her messages were recorded, although they were saved in the junk folder. I quickly accessed her records and downloaded all the voice calls and messages between her mom, Susan, and Barkley. In fact, everything turned out to be simple. They created a WhatsApp group called Baby. It included Hannah, Susan, Barkley, and Stephanie. Taking my time, I looked through the messages in the group. The discussion started 3 months ago, right after the day surrogacy was mentioned. It all started with Hannah offering to donate eggs for a surrogate mother, and then escalated into her becoming a surrogate mother herself. Stephanie played a key role in how the conception would take place, and Barkley readily made suggestions. Stephanie only said that the child should be conceived in passion. She had some irrational belief that a child conceived in a test tube would not have sufficient emotional maturity. It took me about an hour to collect my thoughts. I also took this opportunity to contact my lawyer and ask him for a referral to a divorce lawyer. Leaving the office, I found Hannah sitting in the corner drinking a glass of wine. The first outburst of anger passed, but there was still rage written on her face. I looked at her. "Did you really think that I would swallow this sudden nonsense?" Her anger flared again as she replied, "What do you mean nonsense? We agreed on how to help my sister get out of depression, and you act like a spoiled child, literally throwing my family out of my own home." I just laughed. "You want to commit adultery under the guise of allegedly providing your sister with a child, and you are angry with me for refusing you. Hannah, go and think about what you propose. And remember that this is also my home, and anyone who disrespects me in it will suffer the full wrath of me. I want you to be clear that this will not happen. If you continue like this, it will lead to our divorce. Do you need me to paint a full picture for you to understand? So where are the kids? I hope you at least used some common sense and didn't get them into this mess." The word divorce took the wind out of her sails, but she recovered and said, "If you divorce me, I'll leave you with no pants, paying child and spousal support. I will also receive half of the business, which I will sell to anyone who buys it." I started laughing again. She really was noticeably stupid, and answered, "I hope you haven't listened to enough of Barkley's advice. Not only is this advice bad, but this advice will lead to me taking away his license as the beneficiary of your actions. But let me explain that not only this house, but also the land on which it stands, was given to me before we got married. This is not marital property. We both signed a marital contract. You have no claims to my business, and I have no claims to the business that you and your father run together. If you are planning to become pregnant, especially by a man other than your husband, your medical history will show that you will not be able to care for children. Don't forget that during both pregnancies you were hospitalized for blood pressure problems. So, I agree to guardianship. Hannah, if you want a dirty fight, I'll give it to you. You won't get Barkley pregnant if you plan to stay married to me, and I won't agree to IVF because I don't trust you anymore. You have set things up in such a way that you either win or lose, and winning is our mariage. Now where are the children? I want to see them." She realized that I had stopped the discussion and she would have to retreat. She said, "They're at the Patterson's house number 30. I'm going after them now. Please prepare dinner." I left a couple of pizzas in the refrigerator. I heated up the pizza, then played with the boys in the garden until it was time for bed. I knew I needed to talk to Hannah, but I just couldn't bear to have the conversation. Both boys went to bed at 9:30 in the evening, as I had exhausted them and myself playing football in the garden. Finally, I got to the point where I couldn't hold it in any longer. I went to the refrigerator for a beer and went to the corner where Hannah was sitting on the only chair. He sat down opposite her on the 3-seater sofa, took a long sip of beer, and said, "Did you really believe that I would agree for you to cheat on me and give birth to a child for Susan? Not only that, but you expected me to vacate my own bed. I don't think you understand the disrespect and humiliation you were about to inflict on me." I noticed the sad look on Hannah's face when she said, "I have to do something for Susan. My sister is completely depressed. My mother hates IVF, and Barkley says they can't afford it anyway. If you don't allow it, I'm afraid Susan will hurt herself, and I'll never forgive myself if she does. So, this is a big performance, essentially blackmail." I poured myself another drink and replied, "There's no way you and Barkley will be able to arrange sex to get pregnant. If they can't afford IVF, we'll give them the money, or we can go 50-50 with your parents. If your mom doesn't like it, then that's her problem." To be completely clear, I have already asked the company lawyer for a referral to a divorce lawyer. I'm serious. Do this, and we'll break up. And don't put the costs on me. I won't stay married to a cheater. And if you do this, you will become her. She ran out of the room crying, and I heard the bedroom door slam shut. I don't know if she locked it, but I decided that I wouldn't sleep next to her that night. The thought that she might try to convince me through sex was disgusting, and I wanted her to know what it would be like for her without me. I went into the office, locked the door again, and looked through her message log again. It turned out that they were exchanging SMS in a group. Susan is clearly upset and says this is her only hope and she doesn't know what she will do if she doesn't have the baby in her arms. Hannah started by saying she would work on me, and her mom simply stated, "Do it and ask for forgiveness. He knows that you are much taller than him." Barkley replied, "He can't afford a divorce, but Hannah said that we have a prenuptial agreement and that the business is not part of the marital property." Barkley's only response was, "About." There was silence in the group for a while, but then Hannah jumped out with a message. "He's looking for a divorce lawyer." I checked my email, and Tony, the company's lawyer, responded to my email. "Oh my God, I thought you were both destined to live together. I would recommend Liam Strong. He will email you a list of his requirements." Of course, a letter arrived from Liam Strong. I opened it and read it. The main part of it contained a brief introduction to him and his practice, followed by a request for information. Deciding that now was the right time, I opened a new document in Word and outlined everything I had learned over the past 3 months. I also copied messages from the WhatsApp group and sent him a copy of the document that Hannah signed years ago, giving the company permission to collect, store, and use her messages. Then he closed the computer, pulled out the sofa bed, and went to bed. I woke up to someone trying to open the door to the office. Then I heard a knock and half scream from Hannah. "Mark, what are you doing? Why didn't you come to bed?" I stood up and looked at my watch. It was 3:30 in the morning. Unlocking and opening the door, I found Hannah standing in the hallway in her robe. It was half open, and it was clear that there was nothing underneath. I looked at her silently. "What is the problem?" She answered, "I was waiting for you in bed. I thought we could at least hug and use the opportunity to talk calmly and figure out how I can reassure you that your jealousy is unfounded." Apparently, there were other messages in the group. I didn't want to reveal that I had access, so I left it as is. Instead, I replied, "Hannah, over the years of our marriage, you have used sex to get your way on such minor issues as the color of a new car or whether we should get a dog. This is not a small, insignificant issue. You are planning betrayal, and petty sex and pseudoscientific arguments about my male pride and jealousy will not help deal with this. I have no desire to sleep in bed with someone who thinks about cheating on me, and I hope this gives you an idea of what our life will be like if you go through with it. Good night, Hannah. Go to bed and take this opportunity to think about the damage you're doing to our marriage, how you neglect my feelings and self-respect. Jealousy is not the problem. The problem is my ability to look at myself in the mirror." I closed and locked the door. He turned off the light, but remained standing to the side of the door, listening. There was light coming from under the door, and I knew Hannah was still there. I thought I heard a sigh, and then the light went out. The next day was Saturday. I usually leave later on Saturday, but today I left early. I stopped at the cart to buy a bagel for breakfast, then went to the office, put on the coffee, and sat down at my desk to formulate a plan of action. I assumed Hannah would change course. Last night had been her usual tempt him into submission tactic that she used when she wanted something she considered important. Of course I gave in, but it was fun to hold on. I wondered if she understood that this was not just a request for a dog. She could go one of two ways, or she would become very sweet, showing me how good a wife and mother she was and still is, hoping that I would not notice her infidelity. Or she became a hellish bitch, trying to show that if I didn't give in to her, she would turn my life into complete suffering. I assumed today would be the first, and then I would take the opposite approach. I stayed in the office until 4:30, after everyone had left. I just couldn't bring myself to go home. I realized that our marriage was like a mirror, and Hannah threw a very big brick at it. The mirror is cracked, and will always be cracked. I began to think our marriage was doomed, no matter what Hannah did next. I dragged myself home at 5 o'clock. Of course, Hannah was in the kitchen, the sundress hugging her figure. Her makeup was flawless, and her smile was like Helen of Troy, so you could send 1,000 ships for her. Normally, I would practically attack her in the kitchen, but this time I didn't even pay attention. I went to the spare room to change clothes. About 20 minutes later, she shouted up the stairs, "Mark, dinner is ready." I had to give the boys a good show, but I wanted to make sure that Hannah understood that this loving wife image of her would not change my decision.